The scent of lemon cleaner still clung to my hands as I walked up the narrow steps to our apartment, the rubber soles of my shoes squeaking faintly against the tile. 12 hours on my feet scrubbing marble floors and stainless steel toilets, my back aching and arms sore, but I didn't mind. There was something honest about work like mine. I took pride in leaving things better than I found them. Every surface gleamed under my watch. Every fingerprint vanished. That building downtown, its lobby with the gold trim and fresh orchids, looked like luxury, and no one ever guessed who kept it that way. I did. Me, Isabella Reyes. The key clicked in the lock. I pushed the door open quietly, already picturing Nathaniel curled up on the couch with a basketball game on, maybe a beer in his hand, asking about my day like he used to. But the apartment was dim, lit only by the blue wash of the TV screen. He didn't turn to look at me when I came in. He just stared ahead, his jaw set tight, like he'd been sitting in silence long enough for anger to fossilize inside him. "Hey," I said softly, slipping off my shoes. "You eat already?" "No," he muttered. "Want me to make something?" He shook his head. "I'm not hungry." Something was off. I took a step closer, my bag sliding off my shoulder and landing on the floor with a soft thud. "Nathaniel, what's going on?" He paused. It was the kind of pause that stretched too long, like he was trying to find a way to say something that shouldn't be said. Then finally, without turning toward me, he said, "I don't want you to come to Elena's wedding." I blinked. "What?" "It's better if you don't." "But why?" I asked, my voice cracking a little. "She invited both of us. I helped her pick the flowers last month. I told them not to expect you." I walked around the couch then, needing to see his face, needing to make sense of whatever game he thought he was playing. His expression was blank, detached, like a stranger had slipped into my husband's skin. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Why would you?" "I told them you passed away," he said flatly. I felt the air leave my lungs in a sudden, violent rush. I grabbed the back of the chair beside me to steady myself, my knees wobbling beneath me. "What?" I said again, but it came out like a breath, a ghost of a word. He finally looked at me then, but his eyes were empty. "It was easier," he said. "You wouldn't fit in at something like that. They're elite people. You showing up in your janitor uniform would have made everyone uncomfortable." I stared at him, my heart pounding against my ribs like it was trying to escape. "You told them I was dead." He shrugged. "It's just a story. No harm done." "No harm," I repeated, voice rising now. "You erased me. You rewrote me out of your life like I was an embarrassment." "You're an embarrassment, Isabella." He stood then, stepping around me like I was an object in his way. "I'm tired of pretending otherwise." The words hit harder than any slap. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I watched as he disappeared into the hallway, the door to the bedroom closing behind him with a soft click that sounded more like a door sealing shut on a chapter of my life than just a room. I stood alone in the living room for a long time, the TV murmuring in the background, showing people living lives of joy and ease, so far from mine they felt fictional. A hollow crept into my chest, deeper and colder than I'd ever known. Not because he didn't want me at the wedding, but because I realized, in that moment, he'd never truly seen me. Not the way I saw him. I'd given him years of loyalty, my laughter, my love. And he'd tossed me aside like I was a stain he couldn't scrub clean. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water with hands that shook just slightly, and sat down at the table. My reflection looked back at me in the window, tired eyes, hair pulled back, calloused palms. Not fancy, no, but real, solid. And no matter what Nathaniel had told the world, I was still here, still alive. And that mattered. The motel brochures at the front desk always talked about quiet escapes, and that's exactly what I gave myself, an escape without noise, without confrontation, without even the dignity of a fight. The walls of the apartment were still dark when I stepped out of our bedroom that morning. Nathaniel was already gone. No note, no explanation. Just his absence echoing louder than any slammed door could have. I stood in the middle of the living room with my duffel bag in one hand and a folded uniform in the other, the same uniform I wore every day to the office tower downtown. Navy blue, always a little too stiff, with my name stitched on the chest like a reminder, Isabella. As if I ever forgot who I was. I ran my hand over the couch one last time, remembering the nights we used to fall asleep there watching movies, legs tangled, his head heavy on my shoulder. The memories didn't sting like knives, they felt more like bruises. Dull, sore, reminders that love used to live here and had long since slipped out the back door. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairs, the air outside had that damp, fog-heavy chill San Francisco kept tucked behind every corner. I tightened my jacket and walked. No destination. Just away. The motel I found was a beige rectangle squatting between a liquor store and a tire shop on Mission Street. It smelled like bleach and cigarettes, and the carpet was the kind of green that tried to hide the stains, but never quite succeeded. Still, the lock on the door worked. The water ran hot eventually. The bed didn't creak. And for $95 a night, it gave me what I needed most. A place to be alone. I stood in front of the cracked mirror above the dresser and watched myself sit down on the edge of the bed. That woman in the reflection looked older than I remembered. Not broken. Just worn. And still, somehow whole. I clutched my work badge like it was a lifeline. Reyes, Isabella, Janitorial Services. It had always been enough for me. That job had fed us when Nathaniel lost work. It paid our rent. Bought his birthday gifts. Helped me save a little. Not much, but something. I never expected applause for what I did, but I never thought I'd be shamed for it either. Never thought my husband would tell his own family that I was dead to protect his reputation. He didn't even try to stop me. That's the part that twisted the deepest. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Just silence. I thought about calling Elena, maybe telling her the truth, but stopped myself. That wasn't my place. If he wanted to bury me in lies, let him do the digging. I wouldn't lend him a shovel. The motel room didn't have much. A rattling AC unit, a buzzing fridge, a stiff armchair in the corner. But I pulled out my things, one by one uniform, hairbrush, toiletries in a plastic bag, and placed them on the dresser like anchors in a storm. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I thought I would, but the tears didn't come. Maybe I was still in shock, or maybe I'd cried enough behind closed doors over the last year to last a lifetime. Either way, I sat still. I breathed. The only thing I had left now was that job. That skyscraper full of glass walls and polished brass, full of people who never looked twice at the cleaning crew. But I didn't care. That place had always given me something Nathaniel never could: consistency. Structure. Peace. No matter what happened, the building stood tall, and I showed up. Maybe I didn't belong at rooftop weddings or society galas, but I belonged there, mop in hand, surrounded by the quiet hum of elevators and the hiss of steam from freshly cleaned tiles. As the sun dipped behind the motel curtains, painting the room in a dull orange glow, I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. It was speckled with paint bubbles and a single dead fly trapped in the corner. This wasn't the life I planned. But it was mine now. And I would live it. Alone if I had to. Tomorrow I would show up for my shift. I would clean. I would nod politely at the receptionists and security guards and pretend I was fine. Because even if no one else knew it, I was still standing. Still breathing. Still me. And that would be enough. I was in the lobby polishing the brass elevator doors when I first noticed him, Elliot Harrington. Noticed in the way you do someone who doesn't usually acknowledge your presence, but suddenly does. He was walking with purpose, flanked by 2 assistants, but he paused near the elevator and turned, as if he'd forgotten something. I kept my head down, wiping in small circles, just like I always did. Custodians are invisible until something is broken. That's the rule. But this time I heard his voice. "You're the one who keeps this place shining, aren't you?" I looked up, startled. His assistants had already walked ahead, but he lingered, eyes sharp and curious. I nodded cautiously, cloth still in hand. "Yes, sir. I handle the lobby and most of floor 2 and 3. He smiled, and it wasn't one of those tight, polite, obligatory ones rich people gave when they had to share an elevator with the help. It was warm. Real. "I've noticed," he said. "The building always looks impeccable. What's your name?" I blinked. Isabella. Isabella Reyes. He offered his hand. "Elliot Harrington. My father used to do what you do. Started out mopping factory floors before he built all this." I hesitated for half a second before shaking his hand. His grip was firm, not the kind that makes you feel small, but the kind that says I see you. And in that moment, standing there with my uniform slightly wrinkled and my hair pulled into a messy bun, I felt seen. Not pitted. Not judged. Seen. When he stepped into the elevator and the doors slid shut, I stood still for a moment, heart pounding a little faster than before. It wasn't the kind of moment that changed your life in an instant, not like falling in love or getting hit by lightning. But it lit something in me. A flicker. A spark. The kind that reminded you were still a person worth acknowledging. The rest of the shift passed in a haze of movement, emptying trash bins, wiping conference tables, refilling paper towel dispensers. But my mind kept drifting back to that brief conversation. The way he said his father used to do what I do. The way he spoke with respect, not performative flattery. In a world full of polished shoes and dismissive glances, it felt like a thread of light. Back in the janitor's closet, I sat on the small stool beside the sink and sipped lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. The fluorescent bulb overhead buzzed faintly, casting everything in an unflattering yellow tint, but I didn't care. I pulled my phone out and opened a blank note, writing down his name like it was something fragile, Elliot Harrington. Not because he was famous or powerful or wealthy, but because in a single sentence, he reminded me I mattered. Later that evening, I walked back to the motel, my feet sore, my back aching, but with a strange sort of lightness in my chest. A quiet hum that hadn't been there in weeks. The motel still smelled like old fabric and stale smoke, and my room hadn't magically improved in my absence. But it didn't feel as suffocating. I changed into sweatpants and sat at the small table by the window, eating a sandwich I'd picked up from the corner deli. Every bite was bland, but I chewed slowly, savoring the stillness. I thought about what Nathaniel would say if he knew I'd shaken hands with the owner of the building. Probably something cruel, some dig about me getting delusions of grandeur. But he wasn't here anymore. And his voice had no place in my head tonight. I looked at the city outside, the skyline softening in the dusk, lights blinking on like stars scattered among glass towers. I wondered if Elliot's father had ever felt ashamed of where he started. If he'd ever been made to feel small for building something from nothing. Somehow I doubted it. And if he hadn't, then why should I? Maybe I didn't wear silk or heels or attend black tie galas, but I worked. I endured. I cleaned up messes other people never noticed. That had to count for something. I sat back, staring at the ceiling, letting the spark flicker gently in my chest. Maybe this wasn't the end of my story. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something I hadn't even dreamed of yet. And this time, I'd make sure no one could erase me from it. The building was unusually quiet that morning. A fog rolled off the bay and settled into the streets like a secret, and even the usual lobby chatter was hushed. I liked it better this way, just the sound of my mop swishing across marble and the distant hum of elevators going up and down. It gave me time to think. To breathe. Ever since that brief exchange with Elliot Harrington, I'd found myself standing a little straighter, taking an extra second to polish the brass to a mirror shine. I didn't know why his words lingered the way they did, but they stayed with me like a song I couldn't quite forget. I had just finished refilling the sanitizing stations when I passed by the executive lounge, a sleek, glass-walled space reserved for Harrington Properties senior staff. Usually, I didn't pay it much attention. But that morning, the door was cracked open. I paused, just for a second, to reposition the supply cart. That's when I heard the voices. "They still talk about Dad like he's a legend," one man said, his voice low, controlled. "I just hope I can be half the man he was." It was Elliot. I recognized that calm authority in his tone. "Julian," he added, "you don't need to live in his shadow. You've carved your own path." "I know," the younger man replied, Julian, his son. But sometimes I wonder what he'd think of me marrying into the Brooks family. You're marrying Elena, Elliot said firmly. That's what matters. There was a pause. Then Julian's voice dropped, like he was revealing something fragile. I remember when Elena's brother lost his wife. 10 years ago, right? The car crash. He doesn't talk about it much, but it must have shattered him. My hands froze. Wife. Lost. 10 years ago. No, that couldn't be right. But I kept listening, barely breathing. Hard to come back from something like that, Elliot said. Yeah, Julian murmured. He still keeps her photo on his bookshelf. Says she was the love of his life. My throat tightened. My vision blurred slightly, the hallway lights haloing at the edges. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, until I turned the corner and ducked into a stairwell. I sat down on the concrete steps, my legs trembling. 10 years ago? I hadn't even known Nathaniel back then. We met 7 years ago at a bookstore reading. He spilled coffee on me, apologized profusely, and offered to buy me a new top. We'd laughed. Talked for hours. Dated for 1 year. Married for 6. That timeline didn't just suggest a mistake, it unraveled everything. Nathaniel had told his family I was dead. That part, I already knew. But this? He'd told them I died a decade ago? I tried to slow my breathing, pressing my hand to my chest. He had taken our relationship, our marriage, everything we'd built, and rewritten it like fiction. Made me a ghost long before I ever walked out of that apartment. And he still kept my photo. That was the strangest part. It wasn't just a cruel lie. It was performance. He had invented a version of me who was worth mourning, tragic, distant, beloved. Not the real me, the janitor in creased uniforms who brought home discount pastries and always forgot to water the houseplants. No, he preferred the idea of me. A woman who never challenged him. A woman who didn't live long enough to embarrass him. I felt sick. But beneath the nausea, something else stirred. Rage. Not the hot, uncontrollable kind. No, this was colder. Sharper. Focused. He had stolen my voice, my place in his world, and replaced me with a story. And I had let him. I stood, wiping my eyes roughly. I had a shift to finish. And tomorrow and the day after that. I wouldn't crumble in a stairwell over a man too weak to love someone real. I would work. I would rise. And when the truth finally came out, as it always did, I wouldn't be the one ashamed. He would be. And he would remember that ghosts sometimes come back. The envelope was too thin to be anything good. It was waiting for me at the motel front desk, resting on the stained counter like it had been there for hours, gathering the smell of old air freshener and cigarette smoke. The clerk handed it over without meeting my eyes. Came earlier. Room 207, right? I nodded, already knowing. The return address printed in small type at the corner read, Law Offices of Hendricks and more. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. Still, I took the elevator up, the rattle of its ancient motor buzzing in my spine. The door to my room stuck the way it always did, needing a shove before it creaked open. Inside, nothing had changed. The scratchy motel bedding, the blinking light over the mirror, the chair that always rocked slightly to the left. And now, one envelope heavy with meaning. I sat at the small table beneath the window, sunlight filtered through dusty blinds striping my arms. My hands hovered over the seal. For a moment, I imagined it was something else. A letter from a long-lost friend. A check from a contest I forgot I'd entered. A thank you note from someone who finally noticed my work. Anything but what I knew it was. Then I opened it. The pages were crisp, printed in neat legalese, but they screamed loud enough to echo. Dissolution of marriage. Words I hadn't spoken out loud. Words that brought finality, whether I was ready or not. But what struck harder than the printed lines was the note clipped to the front, a torn scrap of lined paper, hastily written in Nathaniel's handwriting, the same I used to tease him about for looping his Y.S. too tight. Don't contact me again. It's better this way. That was it. No explanation. No apology. Not even a signature. Just that cold instruction, like I was a loose end to be tied off and forgotten. I let the papers fall to the table and stared at them, my chest aching, not in a way that made me cry, but in a way that made me feel like I'd stepped outside of myself. Like I was watching a stranger get her heart broken and couldn't look away. Was this really how it ended? We'd once shared late-night drives for no reason, laughing over gas station snacks and pointing out constellations from the hood of his car. He used to call me Izzy, a nickname no one else dared use, and now I was just a name he scratched off a list. He chose his pride over our marriage. Over me. I stood slowly, walked to the bed, and sat down, the envelope still on the table behind me. There was no dramatic collapse, no wailing into a pillow. I just sat there, feeling everything and nothing all at once. Eventually, I stood again and pulled my bag from under the bed. I didn't have much, just the essentials: work uniforms, toiletries, the small wooden box I kept with family photos and old birthday cards. I slid the divorce papers into it without ceremony, like I was putting away an expired receipt. That chapter was closed now. He had signed the ending for me. All I could do was choose how to live in the space that followed. I looked at myself in the mirror, that same warped motel glass that made me seem thinner, stretched, like time itself had pulled me too far. But I saw something different now. Not shame, not failure, but dignity. Quiet, resilient dignity. Nathaniel might have thrown me away like I was disposable, but I had stayed true. I had loved fully. I had endured the lies, the abandonment, and now this final blow. And I was still standing. I grabbed a pen from the bedside table and pulled the papers back out. My signature went down smoothly, no hesitation. Isabella Reyes. Still mine. Still whole. It was more than an end. It was a reclamation. He had written me off as dead. But I was more alive now than I'd ever been. The morning of the wedding began like any other. I clocked in at 6 a.m. sharp, laced up my sturdy black sneakers, and started my shift by mopping the lobby floors of Harrington Tower. The rhythm soothed me, the steady back and forth, the way the shine returned beneath each stroke, the soft squeak of clean tile under rubber soles. Routine had become my armor. If I focused on the work, I didn't have to think about the past. About Nathaniel. About how my marriage had been quietly buried, then sealed with a note that said, "Don't contact me again." But today, even the routine felt restless. There was an energy in the air I couldn't name, like the moments before a thunderstorm when the wind turns sharp. I tried to shake it off. Weddings didn't concern me, not anymore. Nathaniel's sister Elena would be walking down an aisle today, probably in lace and pearls and fake laughter. She was marrying into the Harringtons. Into legacy. Status. The very world Nathaniel had wanted to protect from the shame of my presence. Let them have it. I finished the lobby and moved to the second floor to wipe the glass conference tables. That's when I noticed the first missed call. Nathaniel, 9:12 a.m. I stared at the screen, the name burning against my skin. I didn't touch it. Let it go to voicemail. Whatever he wanted could wait. I wasn't interested in hearing more cold goodbyes. I moved to the elevator bay, trying to push the spike of anxiety from my chest. My phone buzzed again. Voicemail. Then again. Elena, 9:19 a.m. That one stopped me. Elena had never once reached out to me directly. Not during the marriage, and certainly not after the lie Nathaniel told. She was his world, bright, poised, expensive. She'd always looked at me with that tight smile, the kind reserved for those considered less. If she was calling now, something was wrong. The phone rang again. Unknown. 9:22 a.m. I ignored it. My hands were wet from wiping down glass, but something icy spread across my back regardless. Another buzz. This one I let ring twice before picking it up without thinking. Nathaniel. Again. I answered with a stiff, "What do you want?" His voice came through jagged and breathless, like he'd been running. Or panicking. "Isabella, please. Please, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but..." "You're right about that," I cut in, already reaching for the red button to hang up. "No, wait, just listen, please." He was frantic now. Desperate. "They know." I froze. "What?" "Julian found out." "I don't know how. Maybe someone told him, Maybe he looked something up, I don't know. But he knows. About you. That you're not dead. I said flatly. Imagine that. Please, Isabella, they're all freaking out. Elena's in pieces. My mother's furious. Julian, he's saying he's going to call off the wedding. A pause. Good, I said softly. There was a beat of silence, then his voice cracked. Please, I need you to come. I let out a laugh, humorless and bitter. You need me? After telling your family I was 6 feet under because you were ashamed I cleaned toilets for a living? I was stupid, he said, almost choking on the words. I thought I was protecting something important, our image, our future. I didn't realize I was destroying everything that mattered. You didn't realize? I repeated. You handed me divorce papers. You told me not to contact you again. What do you expect me to do now, show up and save the day? I don't know, he admitted, voice barely a whisper. But I'm asking. Please. I stared out the tall glass window, watching the city hum beneath me. Somewhere in a lavish ballroom, flowers were being arranged, champagne was chilling, and secrets were unraveling faster than satin ribbons. I could hang up. I could go back to my cart and finish scrubbing fingerprints off the glass. Pretend I never heard the cracks forming in the pristine Harrington family legacy. But something inside me shifted. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I cared about Nathaniel's chaos. But because I wanted to be seen. Alive. Real. I wanted them all to look at me and realize what I already knew, that I had never been the shameful one. I'll think about it, I said coldly, then hung up before he could say another word. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was the one holding the pen. I stood outside the Fairmont Hotel for a long moment before I could force myself to step through the glass doors. The place looked like it had been carved from gold and whispers. White-gloved staff moved with precision, every corner gleamed, and everywhere I looked, there was wealth draped in satin and arrogance. I felt eyes on me the second I entered, maybe because I wasn't dressed like them. No designer gown, no pearls, no sky-high heels. Just a simple black dress, clean and pressed, paired with flat shoes and a small clutch I'd borrowed from the motel receptionist, who had smiled knowingly when she handed it over. Inside, the lobby buzzed with quiet luxury. Crystal chandeliers threw sparks of light across the floor, and violins played somewhere in the background. I followed the sound of distant chatter to the ballroom, where the wedding was moments away from beginning. Guests milled about, laughing over champagne, complimenting each other's jewelry, completely unaware that the woman they thought was buried in a tragic past was standing just a few feet away. It was surreal, watching their faces. Some I recognized from photos Nathaniel used to show me. Others had only ever existed in stories he shared at dinner, Elena's college friends, his mother's bridge partners, Julian's business associates. They floated past me like ghosts in pastel dresses and tailored tuxedos, smiling, sipping, oblivious. But then the first whisper floated into the air. Is that? A woman nudged her husband. His eyes widened. More heads turned. The ripple began. It spread like spilled wine, staining conversation mid-sentence. A few people stared outright. One woman gasped and clutched her pearls, like I was a ghost risen from the grave. Another stepped back, her eyes flicking toward the Harringtons, like waiting for confirmation of what they were seeing. And then I saw them, Nathaniel, standing stiff in the corner near the front, flanked by his mother and Elena. His face drained of color the moment our eyes met. He looked like a man who had prepared for every scenario except the one playing out before him. For a second, no one moved. Time folded in on itself. Then his lips parted like he was about to speak, but nothing came out. I walked slowly down the aisle, not the wedding aisle, but the narrow space between the rows of white chairs where guests were now standing to gawk. I didn't rush. I didn't flinch. I let every step declare what I wouldn't say out loud. I'm here. I'm alive. And I am not your secret anymore. Elena turned, confusion clouding her face, her mouth forming my name in disbelief. Isabella? I nodded once. Hi, Elena. She looked between me and Nathaniel, her lips trembling. But I thought you. She's alive, someone whispered behind me. He said she died. Nathaniel finally moved, stumbling forward like he could somehow intercept me, contain the disaster unraveling before his eyes. Isabella, please. I held up a hand. Don't. He froze. A few feet behind him, Julian Harrington stood completely still, his jaw clenched. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I saw it. The realization. The rage. The betrayal that someone had dragged his wedding into a lie this massive. I turned to the room, hundreds of well-dressed strangers now quiet as tombs. I know what he told you, I said, voice steady. That I died. That I wasn't part of his life anymore. That I didn't belong here. But I was his wife. For 6 years. I cooked his meals, paid our bills, loved him through job losses and family arguments and long nights. And one day, he decided I wasn't good enough anymore. Not because I changed, but because I cleaned buildings instead of owning them. A sharp intake of breath echoed through the room. I wasn't dead. I was just inconvenient. Julian took a step toward me, his eyes never leaving Nathaniel. Is that true? Nathaniel stammered, reaching for words that wouldn't come. Elena's face crumpled. You told me she died in a car crash. You let me grieve her. You made me think. She turned away, her hands pressed to her face. I didn't wait for more. I turned and walked out of that ballroom with my head held high, each whisper behind me feeding the fire in my chest. They could talk all they wanted. I wasn't their shame anymore. I was their reckoning. The ballroom behind me was a furnace of whispers, but I didn't stop walking. I didn't need to. I had said what needed to be said, and for once, it wasn't hidden in polite silence or forced smiles. I'd spoken plainly, honestly, in front of everyone Nathaniel ever tried to impress. And now, the ripple I left in my wake was becoming a storm. But I wasn't done yet. The grand hallway outside the ballroom gleamed with gilded fixtures and towering floral arrangements, opulence at its finest. But none of it impressed me anymore. What did luxury matter when it was used to hide cowardice and lies? I took a breath and turned around. Through the open doors, I saw them. Elena collapsed in a chair, her face in her hands, her veil discarded. Julian stood stiffly beside her, jaw tight, his eyes flicking between her and Nathaniel like he wasn't sure who to confront first. And then there was Nathaniel, pacing just behind the last row of chairs, trying desperately to contain the unraveling. I walked back into the room, not because I owed them anything, but because I was owed. The truth deserved more than a dramatic exit. Julian spotted me first. Isabella, he called out, his voice sharp, steady, commanding attention. Would you mind staying? All heads turned again. I kept my posture straight, meeting his gaze. Of course. Nathaniel moved as if to speak again, but Julian cut him off with a raised hand. You told me your wife died in a car crash 10 years ago. That you were still grieving. Nathaniel swallowed hard. I panicked. Years ago, I lied to Elena about Isabella. It was one thing, just a simple excuse not to invite her to something, and it spiraled. I didn't expect it to go so far. You mourned her, Elena whispered hoarsely, lifting her face. I cried for her. I set a place for her at Christmas dinner. You let me write her name in the program for our father's memorial service. She broke off, voice cracking. Nathaniel took a step toward her, desperate. Elena, I was trying to protect you, protect all of us from complications. Complications? Julian echoed. You mean your wife? Nathaniel's shoulders slumped. She was a custodian. It wasn't going to look good, okay? You know how our family is, how your mother would have reacted. My mother, Julian snapped, is shallow and judgmental, but she didn't lie about someone's existence. You did. The air grew tense, heavy with outrage and disbelief. I never asked to be hidden, I said quietly, stepping forward now. I never asked to be anything more than myself. I supported him. I believed in him. And he repaid that by telling the world I was dead. Because I clean floors. Elena stared at me, and for the first time, her expression was stripped of superiority. It was human. Raw. Isabella, I didn't know. I swear if I had. I nodded slightly. I know. It wasn't you who erased me. Julian turned to Elena now, his face softening as he reached for her hand. I love you. But I can't marry into a family that treats people this way. I won't. No, please, Julian. Don't, Elena begged, gripping his hand tighter. Don't punish me for what Nathaniel did. I need time to think, he said, but the weight in his voice made it sound final. Nathaniel stepped forward again, frantic now. Don't let this ruin everything. It was just a lie. It wasn't just a lie, I interrupted, voice firm, clear. It was a choice. A calculated decision to bury me, not because I wronged you, but because I embarrassed you. I loved you through all your failures, Nathaniel. You couldn't stomach one truth about me. And then the room was silent again. Elliot Harrington stepped forward from the crowd, his gaze cutting clean through the tension. I heard everything, he said, voice like a gavel. And I'll tell you what my father taught me, character isn't about what you build, it's about what you uphold when no one's watching. Isabella, you've shown more character here today than some men show in a lifetime. I met his eyes and saw no pity, only respect. Nathaniel looked at the ground. Defeated. Small. I didn't need anything more. I turned to leave again, this time for good. As I stepped out into the marble corridor, the sound of murmuring guests followed me, 100 conversations weaving the truth I had laid bare. But I didn't care what they said now. I had spoken. I had been seen. And I had taken my name back. It was 2 days after the wedding that never was. I had just finished wiping down the glass inside one of the second-floor conference rooms when I heard someone say my name. Isabella. I turned, expecting another manager asking for a spill cleanup or maybe a security guard needing access to a locked supply room. But it wasn't either of them. It was Elliot Harrington. He stood in the doorway, not dressed like the billionaire owner of the tower, but simply, in a black sweater and slacks, his sleeves pushed up, his stance casual. Yet there was nothing casual about the way he looked at me. It wasn't curiosity or politeness. It was purpose. I straightened instinctively. Good afternoon, Mr. Harrington. Elliot, he corrected, stepping into the room. We don't need titles between us. My hands twitched slightly around the rag I'd been using. Is there something you need? He walked over to the table and placed a folder on it. I've needed to speak with you since the wedding. I wasn't sure you'd come back to work after everything. I needed to, I said, meeting his eyes. This job's mine. I won't let Nathaniel or anyone else take it from me. His gaze softened. That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. He gestured to the folder. I hesitated, then set my rag down and opened it. Inside were several typed documents, position descriptions, salary figures, a new ID badge template bearing my name. But what caught my breath was the bolded line at the top of the first page, Director of Operations, Harrington Properties. I looked up slowly, unsure I was reading it right. This isn't a mistake? I asked. Not even close, he said. You've been here for years. I've looked through the building logs. You've worked every shift, shown up through holidays, emergencies, lockdowns. Never a complaint. And what you did at the wedding, it wasn't just brave. It was necessary. I blinked. But I'm just a cleaner. He tilted his head. No, Isabella. That's what Nathaniel made you believe. But what I see is someone who understands this building inside and out. Someone who commands respect, quietly, without demanding it. We've had turnover in our ops team every year, people with degrees and polished resumes who couldn't even manage a fire drill properly. I let out a disbelieving laugh. And you think I can? I know you can, he said without hesitation. This position would oversee maintenance, sanitation, scheduling, and daily logistics across our downtown properties. You'd have a team. A real team. And a salary that reflects your worth. I stared down at the folder. The numbers were almost surreal, 3 times what I was making now. Benefits. Paid leave. An office. A door with my name on it. I don't even have a college degree, I said, almost in protest, not even sure why I was arguing against the very thing I dreamed of on lonely nights in the motel. You have something better, Elliot replied. You have lived experience. And the kind of resilience that can't be taught in a classroom. My throat tightened. I wasn't used to being seen like this, valued, not despite my background, but because of it. Not pitted, not elevated as some kind of charity case, but recognized for what I truly brought to the table. What would people say? I asked quietly. All those executives. You're bored. He smiled. They'll say what they always say when they underestimate someone. We didn't see it coming. And by then, it'll be too late. I didn't speak right away. I looked around the room, the same room I'd cleaned hundreds of times. I remembered wiping coffee rings off that table, straightening chairs for people who never looked me in the eye. I had stood behind the scenes so long, I almost forgot what it was like to imagine something more. But now I did. I reached for the pen clipped inside the folder and signed my name. Isabella Reyes, Director of Operations. When I handed the folder back, Elliot nodded once, pleased. Welcome to the real team. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. By the way, he added, your first meeting is Monday. And you'll need a new badge photo. You should be seen exactly as you are now. No uniforms. Just you. After he left, I sat down at the head of the conference table. Just for a moment. Just to feel the weight of it all. The room was the same. The glass, the tile, the view of the city blinking back at me. But everything had changed. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't dead. I was rising. The knock came just after sunset. I was standing in the small kitchen of my new apartment, stirring a pot of lentils, the soft jazz from the speaker humming low in the background. The windows were open, letting in the cool San Francisco air, and for once, the evening felt still. Balanced. Whole. I didn't expect anyone. Most days I liked it that way. Peace had taken years to find, and I guarded it like treasure. But when I opened the door, there he was. Nathaniel. He looked nothing like the man I remembered. His hair was longer, a little unkempt, like he hadn't bothered to style it. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie loose around his collar, and his eyes, those were the worst part. They looked hollow. Like someone had finally turned the lights on in his perfect little world, and he didn't like what he saw. Hi, he said softly. I didn't move. I didn't invite him in. Just leaned against the doorframe, one hand still curled around the knob. I shouldn't be here, he said quickly, as if trying to get ahead of my anger. I know that. You're right, I replied, calm and measured. He looked down at his shoes, then back at me, his voice catching. I needed to see you. One last time. I waited. I wasn't going to help him find his words. I had filled enough silences for both of us during our marriage. I've lost everything, he said, his voice barely audible. Elena won't return my calls. My mother's furious. Julian's lawyers are talking to the press. The company cut me loose. I deserved it, I know, but He trailed off, staring at me like maybe I could piece him back together. But I didn't move. Didn't offer sympathy. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't going to be the balm to soothe his guilt. You did this, I said, folding my arms. You didn't just lie. You rewrote my entire existence. You made me disappear because you were ashamed of what I did to make a living. And now that your world's falling apart, you come here. His voice cracked. I didn't know how to fix it. It was never yours to fix, I replied. You burned the bridge and then handed me the ashes like it was a gift. He looked away, the weight of my words settling over him. I loved you, he said finally. I shook my head. No, Nathaniel. You loved what I did for you. You loved the idea of a loyal, invisible woman who didn't challenge you, didn't embarrass you. The real me? You erased her. He flinched like I'd slapped him, but still, I didn't move. I had already given him all of me once. He wouldn't get even a fragment this time. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. I nodded. Apology noted. There was a long silence, one that used to terrify me, those empty gaps in conversation where I'd rush to fill the void. But not anymore. Now I let it stretch. Let it press against him, let him sit in what he had created. Then, slowly, I stepped back and began to close the door. He didn't fight it. Just stood there, eyes wet, shoulders slumped, letting the door close on what used to be his life. I turned the deadbolt. And I breathed. Back in the kitchen, the lentils were still simmering, their scent filling the air. The jazz hadn't stopped. The apartment, my apartment, felt like a haven. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Light filtered in through soft curtains, the walls painted a calming sage, shelves filled with books I actually had time to read now. On the coffee table was a mug with the words, "Strong women build themselves," printed in gold. I'd bought it after Elliot gave me the job, after the storm had cleared. I walked to the balcony and slid the door open. The city stretched out before me, glowing in the dusk, buildings rising like stories yet to be written, traffic humming in the distance, life pulsing steady and constant. I stepped out and leaned against the railing, letting the breeze wrap around me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was chasing anything. Not love. Not approval. Not worth. I had reclaimed my name, my story, my dignity. And I had done it without needing anyone's permission. Behind me, my phone buzzed on the counter, probably a message from my new assistant about Monday's meeting. I'd get to it later. Right now, I just wanted to feel the air, watch the sky turn violet, and remind myself that I had walked through the fire and come out whole. Not erased. Not forgotten. Alive. And finally, free.